call the meeting to order. Standing Committee on Access to Information, Privacy and Ethics, meeting 136. Pursuant to Standing Order 108-3H7, the study of privacy of digital government services, and today we have with us Alex Benet, Chief Information Officer of the Government of Canada, Aaron Snow, the Chief Executive Officer, Canadian Digital Service, Ruth Naylor, Executive Director, Information and Privacy Policy Division, Chief Information Officer Branch, and last but not least, John O'Brien, Director, Security and Engineering Reliability, Canadian Digital Service. And it's my understanding that Mr. Benet and Mr. Snow will speak for 10 minutes. So go ahead, we'll start with Mr. Benet, 10 minutes.
Great, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I will be doing my address in both languages for your headphones if you want to connect them right away, and I apologize in advance to the translators as I get quite excited and this topic is very important to me, so I will try to make sure I speak slowly. So thank you, Mr. Chair, for the invitation to appear here before the committee today. Je suis accompagné de Ruth Naylor.
I'm accompanied by Ruth Naylor, as you mentioned, as Chief Executive Officer, Canadian Information and Privacy Policy. I'm going to begin laying out my speech and then I'll answer questions.
Social media and apps that do everything. Canadians have a growing expectation that their government will provide them with services as easily as Expedia, Amazon, or Netflix, which is why the Government of Canada is embracing digital tools to provide Canadians with reliable, accessible, and secure services they expect, while at the same time protecting their privacy. We believe that better service and privacy are not at odds with each other, thanks to technological improvements that allow these protections to be built in from the concept and development stages. À titre de dirigeant principal de l'information du Canada, je dois établir une orientation.
My job is to establish strategic information for the information and technology to protect privacy information throughout the government and also to conduct leadership in these areas. My office is promoting digital services and protecting Canadians' data.
Set of digital standards which helps departments and agencies design better services for Canadians. They ensure government makes investment decisions that increase security and privacy, builds in accessibility from the start, and allows for more collaboration while working in the open. These standards are being put into action with the Next Generation HR and Pay initiative, which is to identify options for an alternative HR and pay solution. Working through our agile process, these digital standards are being used to assess whether vendors can meet government business outcomes, including delivering a solution that is secure and respects the privacy of users. The digital standards allow us to define how the future of government services will be delivered in a digital age, while enabling us to be more agile, open, and user-focused at all stages of design. L'initiative visant à concevoir une solution de prochaine génération pour les
The initiative to come up with the new HR and pay service is something that is an example that we want to see applied successfully. This process will last several years. Much remains to be done, and the results are very promising, I would say. In addition to digital standards, we're going to set out guidelines to help the departments in transitioning to digital. For example, in the spring of 2018, the government approved certain targeted changes that were intended to deal with certain issues. First of all, governance and oversight of technology in general, and to reinforce the role of the Government of Canada as a leader in this area. More recently, in December 2018, we have set up a direction dealing with technology of information. And more particularly, we are dealing with the interface of various applications, APIs, and our changes will make the services of the Government of Canada accessible through the interface of these apps, and that will provide an exchange of information between the departments and Canadians. The API standards will also allow the private sector to work collaboratively with the government and to ensure the safety and the security and protection of privacy for Canadians. We have also, in September 2018, dealt with business architecture. That architecture deals with technology and the protection of personal data. Our changes are supported by open standards that are based on ethics, data, and the safety of data. Our changes will allow us to better serve the government in terms of technology policy, and also we will be able to promote a dialogue in terms of supply and services. These are essential in developing a long-term policy for the Government of Canada.
Integrate security and privacy at the investment and design stage of government services, programs, and operations. The proposed digital policy will continue to be developed over the course of this year. Mr. Chair, along with our partners at the Canada School of Public Service, we've also created a Public Sector Digital Academy, the first of its kind in Canada. The Academy will be giving our employees the leading-edge skills they need to deliver the digital government services Canadians expect. An important part of this curriculum is privacy. As we move forward on digital service delivery, we're also collaborating with provincial and territorial governments, as well as the private sector, to create rules to commonly accept and trust digital identities. Canadians don't need to know how government is organized or the intricacies of federal, provincial, and territorial jurisdiction when they try to access services. To improve service delivery, we'll focus on the needs of the user rather than the organization of government, and enable Canadians to conveniently and securely access online services across jurisdictions. For example, we're building a digital identity ecosystem to support the use of trusted digital identities by Canadians to access services across jurisdictions. These jurisdictions include all orders of government, private sector, and even international partners. Specifically, development has begun on an initiative called Sign in Canada. Through this common access point, Canadians across the country will be able to access their government services online using their federated, trusted digital identity. Sign in Canada will also support the digital service strategy in our efforts to federate identity across the Government of Canada. In addition, we're also establishing a digital exchange platform to help enable departments to share their data with each other and the outside world in a modern, secure, and unified way. This would be similar to Estonia's X-Roads, which you've heard about. Just as Canadians don't need to know how government is organized to access services, citizens expect government not to ask repeatedly for the same information. Donc, nous avons adopté des procédures obligatoires en ce qui concerne l'architecture.
Also, we have adopted mandatory procedures with respect to business architecture, and we are harmonizing the preliminary analyses. What's more, we will bring together the representatives of business and technology throughout government. We want to be sure that the information that Canadians give us is respected, protected, within the government and interoperable at the same time.
Delivery by investigating a Tell Us Once user experience. This means that Canadians could possibly provide key information once and not be repeatedly asked for the same information when dealing with different departments and agencies. The staff is currently examining government business processes, policies, and legislation to identify any barriers to implementing this service vision. With this in mind, we need to look at the rules around information sharing and how we could, with the right checks and balances in place, allow more efficient information sharing across departments and agencies that provide services to Canadians. The staff is also working closely with the Office of the Privacy Commissioner to benefit from their advice on our plans and initiatives to advance digital government. We've heard from the Privacy Commissioner that privacy should not be characterized as a barrier to innovation. We look forward to continuing the work closely with the Privacy Commissioner to rethink how we can best protect the personal information of Canadians. Mr. Chair, to meet our privacy obligations, we have to do the hard work of developing digital services that are citizen-centered and protect the personal information of Canadians. To that end, we're collaborating on a number of fronts in order to share best practices and learn from the work of others. To harness the power of technological advances, TBS and PSPC have been working to develop innovative, agile procurement tools to meet the current demands of the public service. Nous avons travaillé ensemble récemment pour créer la première liste de fournisseurs.
We have recently worked together to establish the first list of AI suppliers. We want to ascertain whether or not these people have the necessary knowledge and ethical background for this type of very necessary work. With respect to personal information, this has to align with the standards of the government and be strengthened by the policies that are in place. We will use these new tools to ensure concrete oversight to avoid any type of repercussions for Canadians. To have this significant policy, we have had to work with international experts, leaders in industry, and officials who are at the headlines.
Which was recognized in September when the World Wide Web Foundation's Open Data Barometer ranked Canada first in the world alongside the United Kingdom for its open data leadership. Each of these areas, such as AI, data, cyber, and privacy, do not exist in silos. They are intertwined with each other and with the sectors to such an extent that it is impossible to know it all. Technology continues to dissolve traditional boundaries, which is why it's essential that we continue to work as one government, recognizing that all aspects of our businesses are being touched more and more by technological advances. Mr. Chair, success in digital government means providing that seamless, integrated services people have come to expect, services that meet people's needs and expectations of government, and that ensures that government stays relevant in people's lives. This obviously includes protecting Canadians' privacy. Charting this course for modern digital services, including privacy protections, will keep Canada on the cutting edge of citizen support and engagement. Pour terminer, laissez-moi vous dire que j'ai...
To conclude, I would just say I'm very anxious to read the report from your committee with its recommendations, and I thank you for your attention.
Next up, for 10 minutes, Mr. Snow.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the committee and Alex. This is my colleague John O'Brien, Director of Security and Reliability Engineering at the Canadian Digital Service. Before CDS, John was at the Communications Security Establishment as a technical lead for malware analysis and automation, or put more simply, John knows how the bad guys operate. For those of you who are less familiar with CDS, we're a digital consultancy in government for government. We're part of the Treasury Board Secretariat, and we work side by side with Mr. Benet's organization. CDS was established only 18 months ago with a mandate to help this government improve how it designs and delivers digital services by providing direct, hands-on help to federal departments to make digital services faster, simpler, more accessible, and secure. In the process, we help build capacity in those departments to do modern service design and delivery. For example, we've been working with Veteran Affairs Canada to improve how veterans and their families find and access benefits, with Immigration, Refugees, and Citizenship Canada to help newcomers to Canada reschedule their citizenship tests online, with the Royal Canadian Mounted Police to help victims report cybercrime and online fraud, with our colleagues in Mr. Benet's office to make connections to government websites more secure, and with the Canada Revenue Agency to help Canadians with low income to file their taxes and access related benefits. Je suis American.
I'm an American.
Initiative in the U.S. to bring new tools, practices, and approaches into government to better serve the public. In 2013, I was a Presidential Innovation Fellow. We were told on our first day as fellows that it was a bait-and-switch program, and sure enough, many of us who signed up for 6-month fellowships stayed for 4 years. My colleagues and I went on to create the service delivery unit called 18F in the aftermath of the failed initial launch of healthcare.gov. I served as 18F's first director of delivery and then as executive director. I'm also a former lawyer. As Mr. Benet pointed out, digital isn't just about bringing services online. As our UK colleague Tom Loosemore once put it, digital is about applying the culture, practices, processes, and technologies of the internet era to respond to people's raised expectations. Now, technology is not without its challenges, but it's not usually the hard part. We only half joke at CDS that we're a change management office disguised as a digital service office half the time. So how do we go about designing and developing government digital services that are both easy to use and secure? There are lots of answers to that question, but I want to touch on 5 important practices that CDS tries to demonstrate in every project we take on and that historically have been more the exception than the rule in government, although that is changing rapidly. First, to apply research and design practices that put people first, not rules and processes. Second, to deliver and improve continuously. Third, to assume there will be failures and to be good at reacting to them. Fourth, to work in the open. And finally, to have strong feedback loops between delivery and policy. So first, CDS relentlessly focuses on the people who use government services. In practice, this means working with users continuously to find out what they need, not just what government needs from them. We know that among those needs, security and privacy are critical and non-negotiable. To meet those needs, we factor them into how we build and deliver services from the outset and continuously throughout deployment and development. This allows us to test our assumptions with the people who will use the service, and if you've never witnessed user research, it can be eye-opening and profoundly humbling. And it lets us develop a mutual understanding about what data is actually necessary to complete a service transaction and provide a first-rate experience. By engaging with users early on and throughout the design of a service, we're able to develop an ever-improving understanding of their specific needs, concerns, and preferences, including what and how much personal data we need to deliver a great service, how long we need to retain that data, and how we can provide assurances about how we'll handle it, and when appropriate, delete it. Talking directly and often to the people we serve is critical to building in privacy and security from the start. Which brings me to the second point about how we work. We develop digital services iteratively, employing practices and tools that enable continuous incremental improvement. So how does this promote more secure systems? Well, the Canadian Centre for Cybersecurity publishes a list of the top 10 IT security actions organizations can take to minimize the likelihood and impact of a cyber intrusion. And one of their key messages is to keep your systems patched and up to date, like the regular updates you make to your phones from Apple, Google, or BlackBerry. This seems simple, but it's an issue for organizations everywhere. To do this well and timely, services need to be built in such a way that frequent improvements are the norm, not the exception. The harder it is to make changes to your system, the longer it will take to create and disseminate fixes when a vulnerability is discovered. Some government systems in operation today deploy changes only a few times a year, other than urgent patches, and even simple change requests can take more than a year to work their way through the long queue, get coded, and survive a lengthy, manually driven gauntlet of review, compliance tracking, testing, staging, and perhaps a little silent prayer before they go live. By contrast, most of the websites you interact with every day, built by companies like Amazon and Google and Shopify, release dozens or hundreds of changes every day, safely, quickly, and painlessly into the public. This process is commonly referred to as continuous delivery, and it's how we build things at CDS too. Updating systems to improve reliability, to fix problems, to adapt to users' changing needs and expectations is easier, faster, and more reliable this way. Making this model of continuous delivery and improvement the norm in government is both a problem of technical debt and a problem of delivery practice. But modernizing our systems and how we manage changes to those systems is the single most effective thing we can do to improve the security posture of those systems. This brings me to my third point. Continuous delivery enables you to act quickly when something goes wrong. Not if, when. In a perfect world, every system would be 100% secure. Of course, we don't live in that world. Cybersecurity best practice is to make the rational assumption that failures and breaches will happen and to plan accordingly. Leading organizations make the most of the lessons learned after every such incident, large or small, to improve their resilience. We conduct blameless postmortems after incidents, creating an environment where staff feel psychologically safe and confident in being fully open and honest about errors or mistakes. We learn more and improve more by acknowledging failures than by hiding them. It's healthier for organizations to encourage discovering and surfacing the root causes of failures than for people to fear being blamed for circumstances outside their control. Fourth, we've all witnessed the blowback against organizations that stay silent about security incidents or other kinds of project failure for far too long. This is one reason why we work in the open, that is, in full view of the team and, whenever possible, the public. Building our services in the open by default reduces risk. This might seem counterintuitive. It is a stubborn myth that secrecy is good for security. In practice, developing software in the open allows others to contribute to, stress test, and critique our work, provides more incentives for everyone to get the code right instead of taking shortcuts that might not be exposed in a tightly held environment. It gives us the opportunity to discuss openly the decisions we're making and the potential trade-offs. It allows us to create a culture of learning from mistakes, and it shares our work with others, a perk of which we've been the beneficiary many times already. The UK government encapsulates this in a simple design principle. Make things open, it makes things better. The same principle appears in our government's digital standards. This brings me to my final point about how we go about delivering secure, easy-to-use services to the public. Mike Bracken, who led the UK's government digital service through its first 4 years, once wrote, quote, "In an analog world, policy dictates to delivery, but in a digital world, delivery informs policy. This is what agile means for government and its services," unquote. Working with and listening to our users, putting working prototypes in front of them as quickly as possible, and continuously improving those services is the best way not only to learn what works for our users, but to learn which policies are working and how others are not, and how we should update them to keep pace with modern expectations. This is somewhat of a shift from traditional policy development, often divorced organizationally from implementation. Everything is figured out months, maybe even years before it lands at the people who will be impacted by it, at which point, unsurprisingly, it may sometimes miss the mark. We believe that the practices CDS employs and promotes every day, practices encouraged by the digital standards, are the best way to meet public expectations for better, more integrated services that are also more secure and more responsive to the privacy needs of Canadians. Having done this in 2 countries, I feel certain of this. Change is hard, and it doesn't happen overnight. But we're making headway in meeting the public's expectations for user-friendly, efficient, secure service delivery, and we look forward to making more and greater progress. Thank you. I'll be happy to answer your questions.
Thank you. You both. First up for the first question for 7 minutes, Mr. Saini.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much for coming. I want to start off with you first, Mr. Binet. One of the things that we've seen in the systems that we have right now is we have legacy systems, and there is a shortage of technological skills within the government. And you've started a concept called Talent Cloud because of the ongoing change in our economy, the gig economy. Can you explain to me how that's working out, and going forward, if you have people coming in temporarily, how do you build a long-lasting sort of talent pool to make sure that you have the requisite talent going forward?
Thank you for the question. So, Talent Cloud is an experiment by a select few public servants who thought that we could look at a different model of bringing in employees into the Government of Canada. We do tend to take a decent amount of time to bring employees in, and the goal is trying to bring staff and employees into the Government of Canada within about 30 days. Still the goal, not achieved yet, but working towards. By using some of the techniques that my colleague Mr. Snow mentioned, they were able to, in the last year, launch a beta, open source, very low cost prototype where we're now hiring people within roughly 40 to 50 days. So we're addressing the need to bring people in quickly in government. What the system also does is it looks at the concept of the gig economy that's out there, where people are increasingly in the technology field choosing short-term assignments as opposed to a 35-year career with the public sector, which makes coming in and out very difficult. So what we're trying to do with the gig economy at this point, and it's still with the Talent Cloud, my apologies, which is still experimental, is facilitate that trend. Give otherwise contract employers the rights to have access to pensions and benefits, and they may choose to come and work for 6 to 12 months at a time with our Talent Cloud solution and then leave for a few years and come back in. In the technology space, that's extremely useful because it means that people stay relevant, people work in different sectors, they're bringing a different perspective, and we're actually making that concept of a porous public sector increasingly a reality thanks to the work that Talent Cloud team is doing.
Mr. Snow, in your opening comments, you talked about iterative learning. And so with the amount of information that will be collected, there's going to be a lot of pressure using AI to analyze the data and the public service metrics, obviously to make better decisions and to increase the efficiency of delivery. How do we convince the public that this is something that's going to be in the best interests of them and the government in the long term?
Excuse me. I think the core principles that you need to stick to maintain and gain the public's confidence are transparency and acknowledgement. When we talk about iterative service development, we talk more about user research and understanding needs of users at a more micro level than a macro level that might be more conducive to the use of AI. But in any number of veins, when we're talking about using large amounts of data and using algorithms that may or may not be perceptible by most of the public, being as transparent as possible and having an open conversation with private and not-for-profit and public sectors about what constitutes the appropriate oversight of AI is going to be core. This is more in Mr. Binet's woodhouse than mine. But
And do I have some time? Lots of time? 3 minutes? Okay. Another question that I wanted to ask is, I know that the comparator that we use to judge our abilities going forward is Estonia. But Estonia has only 1.3 million people. It's got 4 million hectares of land, half of which is forest. So the country's not terribly big. Plus, it's a unitary form of government. The one thing Norway has done is they've started an email or a mailbox for every citizen, where every citizen has a designated mailbox where information is delivered to them. My concern is that, in challenge going forward, as an advanced country, an advanced economy, you have different government departments that already have legacy systems that are there. How are we going to bring everything together so that the information is accessible in one touch, but also making sure that we have an ability to communicate in the interim with the public?
Sorry, thank you. It's a red means go, user design. Anyways, so it's a very good question. Estonia is one example. You've raised some important points of difference. We also have provincial and some pretty large, significant municipalities as well across the country. So we are not Estonia. I think it's important, both culturally, legally speaking. However, there's a lot of things we've learned from the Estonians. We've learned how to share data in a way that is secure. We've learned that they can actually deliver digital services and increase privacy at the same time. They've shown the world that this can be done. So for us, it's a question of scale, and it is a question of technical debt and legacy, to your point. And we've put in place some governance measures over the last year where we are asking departments to come and have conversations about their solutions earlier, through a mandated enterprise architecture review board where every functional group is represented at the table, from security to privacy to applications to service delivery, and to make sure that we're actually having the right conversations and that we're not doubling down on legacy because it's the easier thing to do. And we're actually having the conversations around moving to cloud, around protecting citizens' data, around artificial intelligence, and around new governance challenges that some of these technologies pose. So we've systematically been bringing the conversation closer to investment decisions, because that's where some of the decisions are made, and often we live with the repercussions.
And one final question, and this is more of a theoretical question, because as you know, Canada is part of the D9 group that's moving towards digital government. I'm just wondering, with the interplans, looking at some of the countries, a lot of them we have free trade agreements with, so obviously there's going to be information going back and forth. Has there been any discussion of discussing one standard where everyone could abide by, therefore the transmission of information, because if there's an entity here that wants to do business or public procurement in another country, that they would be able to do that knowing that there's one system, a certain level of privacy, a certain level of architecture, a certain level of technology. Has there been any discussion on that?
We took a first step towards that. So the short answer is not yet. It is a group that is fairly new, but we did take a first step towards that when Canada led actually a joint declaration on responsible artificial intelligence usage across all of the countries, which now means we can go back into our respective countries and work with our industry to make sure that we start respecting some of these rules. The next step will be to bring corporations into the D9 conversations and start working together. So the answer is it's a beginning. It's not necessarily as mature as you would have described.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Saney. You had something, Mr. Snow?
Not the D9, but there Canada is in a treaty with nations in Europe that requires us and all those nations to provide a single source of. I'm sorry.
GDPR, is that right?
No, a single source of procurement opportunities across federal, provincial, local governments, academic and health institutions. Sometime, I believe, before this is way outside my wheelhouse, but by 2022, we've been discussing working on that with PSPC. So PSPC would be the right folks to talk to about that.
Thank you. Next up for 7 minutes, Mr. Kent.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks to all of you for attending today. Mr. Benney, I'd like to pick up on your remarks with regards to the differences between Estonia and Canada's the wonderful federation. There are still some who believe that Estonia's digital government, which was in effect created through democratic imposition on a compliant population after the breakup of the Soviet Union, that it's still a sort of glittering digital city on the hill, if you will, that Canada should try to emulate. I wonder if you could speak to just how realistic is it, even if limited only to federal government departments and agencies, how realistic is that, do you believe, to be achieved or could be achieved in Canada in, say, a decade?
So I'll answer from a technological perspective, and by that I mean that there's a lot we can learn from what the Estonians have done. Their X-Roads, their data sharing platform. We brought some of the founders into Canada twice over the last year to start recreating our own similar platform, but with sort of the Canadian perspective, which is we have provinces, we have large municipalities, and so we are not Estonia. So from that perspective, we've learned a lot. We've learned also a lot around the need to continuously update laws. For example, in the context of a digital age, we've also learned the fact that they do data governance very well. So they decree that an organization is the holder of that piece of data, and that becomes very rigidly implemented. So there's a lot of things, regardless of scale of countries and values and background, that we should look to, and that we actually are looking to. And so we've learned a lot from them. We've also learned a lot from our other D9 partners. So, for example, Portugal has a very good digital identification system that may be actually closer to Canadian systems than I will in Estonia. So we do look to Estonia on technological leadership, but in some cases, we're seen as leading in values and ethics around ethical AI and responsible AI usage. So they're learning from us. So it's actually been a very good relationship that way.
Mr. O'Brien, could you speak to that?
So I'm not super familiar with X-Road, the technology itself. That being said, if you were to approach it from just a pure functionality that it offers, right? So the idea of verifiable audit logs, that in itself is a function that I would suggest we would want to have in any system that we put out. The second factor in that is the concept of having citizens being able to see when government officials access their data. Like that transparency, I think, is the core elements that we need to kind of build in any system we build out in the future. And I think if we can articulate those things quite clearly to Canadians, it will not be a very difficult thing to sell.
Yeah. And Mr. Binet, I was gently amused, positively amused by your reference to your sentence, Canadians don't need to know how government is organized or the intricacies of federal, provincial, and territorial jurisdiction when they try to access services. And it reminded me, generationally, of when Réal Coët, the Quebec politician, tried to explain or tried to justify social credit economic policy by saying, you don't have to understand how a carburetor works if when you step on the gas, the car goes. And it brings me to procurement, and you talked about the investment and design stage of government services, programs, and operations, and the Phoenix system comes to mind, where apparently those who were procuring the system decided to cut costs, acquisition costs, by eliminating some of the services that the manufacturer, the vendor, was actually recommending to government, and we've seen the result of that today. So I guess my question has to do with perhaps citizens don't have to know the intricacies, but I think we have a shortcoming in terms of our procurement, those in charge of procurement within government. I wonder if you could comment to that.
Certainly, I'll comment on both aspects. The reason that we're trying to design, and it gets back to Mr. Snow's point, when we say comments such as we don't want to impose the structures of government on service delivery to citizens, we would just want them to be seeing us as the government of Canada and make it as seamless as possible to access services. So we do have structures, we do have laws, we do have processes within the government of Canada, but with technology, we may be able to actually represent our existence and our delivery of those services in a very different way to citizens that's much more intuitive. So that's what we mean by those comments, is how do we streamline things for citizens, not what we think they want, but actually talking to them, to some of Aaron's point, on what it is that they want. So in light of that, what we've been able to do with, for example, the next generation system of Phoenix is actually take a good hard look at the lessons learned that were produced by the OAG, by the Goss-Gilroy report, by committee reports, and actually apply those lessons so that we could say they were lessons learned in the replacement of Phoenix. So for example, the procurement exercise we're currently running, we've had user expos conducted across the entire country where we're putting the actual competing technologies that are going through this process in the hands of users for them to test and give us their comments, putting accessibility experts in a room and actually testing things. So we've actually been able to, by putting the user at the center of it, kind of change the decision mechanism from a process to what Aaron was outlining to what is it that the HR administrator, the pay administrator, the everyday public servant will need, and we've actually embedded them in the procurement process in a way that's not been done before. So we are able to show that we can actually move some of these issues on procurement in a very fast way. We have everybody included in the process from the beginning. including the parliamentary budget officer sits in on our meetings once in a while, to union and heads of collective agreement, bargaining agreement agents. And so it's been a very inclusive tent. So it's been a very large tent. We have privacy by design principles being applied to the procurement process as well. And all of our documents, for the most part, are other than as long as it doesn't interfere with the procurement process, are publicly available on a portal. So people can actually see our transition as we're going through this and feed into the process. So we're showing that we can do the thing differently. It's our first step into this space, and we'll see how this goes. So.
A minute.
Well, so that, just to my final question, or the final part of my question, does the expertise exist in your agency to recognize that if a vendor, if a supplier of a certain technology says you need the whole package at the full price, if you buy less, there's going to be problems. You have the expertise to actually accept or analyze what that provider is telling you.
At this point, we do, and if we don't, we go get it, and then we recognize when we don't. But again, the way we've designed this process has actually been iterating with the vendors. We're actually talking to them as we're going through the process, which is slightly different than a traditional procurement process where we talk through binders and responses and 200 and 300 page RFPs. In this case, we're actually working with them as we're designing the process, every gate, because we've gated our entire process. So if we know in talking to them that we have some gaps, we will go get them. You heard me in my statement say that it's very hard to be an expert in absolutely everything in digital, and I think if we start with that premise, we'll make sure we have the right people around the table when we know there's a gap.
Thank you, Mr. Kent. Next up for 7 minutes, Mr. Angus. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you so much for your presence today. This is a fascinating discussion. When I was a much younger, much better looking man, I sat on a committee that did government operations, and much of what we're talking about, I think, is under the purview of government operations. So we need to focus on what is the purview of this committee, which is issues of the ethical rights of citizens and privacy rights. And so I'm going to stay mostly focused there. Mr. Snow, Canada has suffered endless amounts of security attacks against government servers, particular government agencies over the years. They tended to be state actors. Are you seeing a change between undermining security threats from state actors or from individual actors and gangs who are trying to access information?
CDS works with a limited number of partner departments at a time. We don't have that sort of horizontal data, and we aren't privy to the kinds of threats that various departments are seeing in the back-end systems that we don't touch. So that's probably not a question for me.
Mr. Bennett?
So I don't have the data readily available of state actor versus an individual, but what we're trying to operate under at this point is that an attack could come from someone in their basement, frankly, all the way to a state actor and everything in between. And we have people that are knocking on the front door of government systems with hundreds of thousands of times a day. And so we've been able to centralize some of our infrastructure with Shared Service Canada in order to sort of build a moat around this. We've created a new National Cybersecurity Center that was launched this year that's trying to bring private and public sector together as well, because an attack on one sector can often bleed into another, critical infrastructure as an example. So what we have to do when we're designing our services is actually bake in security from the beginning. You heard me speak about the architecture review board that we created. Well, the security lens is applied for every major project, digital project moving forward in the government of Canada over the last 12 months.
Thank you. Well, I remember when the fax machine was cutting edge technology, and among the first people to use this cutting edge technology were the scammers running the Nigerian 419 scam. And you had to do a lot of work to get all those faxes out there, and you probably didn't get a lot of pickup. And then the internet came along, and their ability to hit millions increased. When you have one point of contact of information, you can only be so successful. But when you got 2 or 3 points of information about a person, you can become very successful. And I, in my office, and I'm sure my colleagues, deal with people who've been victimized or are being victimized all the time by these scams. And they're much more sophisticated now as the technological changes happen. So my question then is in terms of government information, in terms of financial, medical, the importance of protecting that information is vital, because that's where the non-government actors are going, and that's what they're looking to use. So what assurances do we have that as we put more of our private information into one big system, we're actually being protected?
Sorry if you want to jump in. So we're not advocating to put our government information, just to be very clear, in one big system or one big data lake or one big pool of information. We have, for example, the Canada Revenue Agency is responsible for the business number in our policies, and it doesn't mean that information is not located everywhere else, in other places, I should say, as well. So we're not advocating for sort of a central system. I think that...
So can I ask you on that then? So when we have cases in Canada Revenue where information is improperly accessed of citizens, are you involved in the review of how that goes down, or is that siloed under CRA saying, well, those are just a few bad apples in our operation? Because if we're putting more information out there, like, what do you actually get to be part of these conversations about the misuse of information, personal information within government services?
Yeah, so for privacy breaches, actually, luckily, Ruth's team is responsible for overseeing and being involved in these discussions. On the cyber front, we have another executive director who works closely with Shared Service Canada and with CSEC on major incidents, and they do make their way into the Office of the CIO, frankly, on a daily basis. Ruth, I don't know if you want to comment on privacy breaches in process?
Yeah, I can speak to that a little bit. So institutions have a responsibility, an obligation under our policies, our Treasury Board policies, to report privacy breaches that are material in nature, both to the Office of the Privacy Commissioner and to TBS. Both of us, we work actually quite closely with the Office of the Privacy Commissioner to compare notes on those reports. At TBS, we make a range of tools available to institutions to support them to both identify and as well to manage and do the reporting aspect of this. And we'll work with the OPC and follow up with institutions where that's warranted.
Well, I find that's actually, I'm finding that very impressive. My concern is that we've seen, and I've studied privacy breaches in the previous Parliament when that was my beat, and how often departments decided not to tell the Privacy Commissioner. Maybe 10% of the time they came forward and they said, well, we didn't think it was big or it was a problem. I mean, people don't want to make it look like they really blew it. When you have hundreds of breaches, it doesn't look good for the department. So how do we know that all the breaches are being reported? Because that was the Privacy Commissioner's frustration before. It should be the Privacy Commissioner who decides whether or not the breach is significant, not the department.
From a cultural perspective, you heard my colleague Aaron mention the fact that we have to get into a place where escalating issues is not seen as a negative necessarily and is seen as a positive, and there's been some good steps toward that throughout the public service, and we've had a lot of support from senior government officials on the transparency required to raise some of these issues, and we're seeing deputy ministers, ADMs, and DGs asking for give me sort of an update on the red status of either projects or breaches. So culturally speaking, it's going to continue to be sort of a work in progress. There's some good momentum on that side from a transparency perspective in the public service, but Ruth has probably some details on a 2-year action plan that we're developing in partnership with the departments in the Privacy Commissioner's office.
Yeah, we had the benefit of some recommendations from the Privacy Commissioner in his last annual report on exactly this issue. Their concerns around the varying numbers of breaches that are reported. Often it is for institutions that decision about what's material and what's not. I think institutions are working sort of in good faith on that, but we want to be doing some work over the next 2 years. We're developing a 2-year action plan. We've actually shared it with the Office of the Privacy Commissioner because we want their input before it's finalized, and we'll be working in partnership with them to deploy it. But it'll be focusing on increasing awareness about just the nature of personal information, what is a breach, how to report a breach, and at the recommendation of the Office of the Privacy Commissioner, we're focusing a lot of those efforts on the IT community and the security community because they're the people on the front lines when there could be a compromise or information could be lost. So we want to make sure that they've got the instinct to say was personal information involved in this. So we're hoping over the course of the next 2 years that we've got a small team working on this in partnership with government institutions, and we'll be able to make a difference on that front.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Angus. Next up for 7 minutes, Mr. Erskine Smith.
Thanks very much, and thanks to you all for being here. So, while I don't think Estonia is maybe a perfect solution, there are some perfect solutions within Estonia that we have to learn from. So, digital ID, I think, is a critical aspect of moving towards more digital government. X-Road is another aspect, and I'm glad you're doing work on that front. And then there's obviously a transparency component where in their law, where a public official accesses personal information, it's transparent to the citizen. So I want to walk through the first two pieces at the very least, which are more under your purview. So you mentioned with respect to digital ID, Mr. Benet, that there's Sign in Canada. And maybe you could give me a bit more background as to when did that start, where are we at, and what are we looking at moving forward?
So Sign in Canada itself is in its infancy. Apologies. What we've been focused on in the last few years, instead of the technology, is actually the rules framework underneath it. So there's something called the Pan-Canadian Trust Framework that we've been working on with provinces, with NGOs, nonprofits, and with the corporate sector as well, which is essentially a set of rules that we all agree to abide by in order to respect each other's identities. So if a province abides by the Pan-Canadian Trust Framework, it should be good enough for the federal government, should be good enough for a bank. It's more of a federated model, which it matches actually the governance framework of the country more.
So what does it look like? I'm a citizen and I want to log into the CRA, I want to log into EI, I want to log into to renew my driver's license at the provincial level. I don't want all these passwords. I don't want to have to remember that my CRA password is completely, and my username even is different, and then I store it in a separate password folder. I want simplicity as a citizen. How is this going to make, what does it look like from a citizen perspective?
Yeah, correct. So fall victim to those as well myself personally, and have invested interest in ensuring that these things don't happen. So Sign in Canada will essentially permit you to choose the no wrong door approach to services, accessing federal services from a province or a territory, or vice versa, possibly from your bank as well. We do have the security regime in place to put this in place, but we didn't have the rules framework in place. So Sign in Canada means that you could have access to ESDC services from CRA, or you could actually through, and we are in active discussions on possible pilots and projects with provinces where we would give federal services through the provincial ID system as well. So it's very different than the Estonia model, which is sort of a singular approach to it. We are taking more of a no wrong door approach to services, as long as a rules-based approach is followed.
And in terms of privacy implications, has your office, or in consultation with OPC, you have a list of potential privacy concerns and how to address them?
Yeah, so part of the new governance that we put in place 18 months ago, roughly, when we changed the Financial Administration Act to create standards, and we changed the governance process around the Architecture Review Board, means that any one of these kinds of major projects has to go through this review board where privacy is looked at. Another part of this may possibly be legislative impediments as far as data sharing as well, which is another sort of a tombstone piece of work we have to do, and we've been in conversations with the Privacy Commissioner's office on those, for example, as well. So I suspect that the dialogue will continue to increase as we do more and more digital services between my office and the office.
Is there any, I guess, written analysis that could be shared with this committee with respect to any privacy implications of digital ID?
Yeah, we can certainly make any of that documentation available. We've also started a legislative review process, so we can. I'm looking to Ruth.
That would be. I mean, it's certainly helpful, I think, for our committee's work. You mentioned X-Road as well, and you said we're moving down that path as well. Presumably that's in its infancy too, but maybe you could give me an update as to where we're at and what does the road ahead look like?
No, so in this case, it's a little bit more further ahead than the identification piece. So what our Canadian Digital Exchange Platform is, or DXP for short, is a series of tools, from a messaging service, for example, where we can share the data, to an open source API store where federal government services will be able to create an API for third parties to gain access to either unclassified data for now. So we're walking before we're sort of running. As we're designing this, I'd say we're about 50% complete the build. The question is finding real live use cases that have minimal risk, and that we are using unclassified data first and not citizen data, because we will make sure that we walk before we run. So in this case, we've actually brought the Estonians in that designed X-Roads and started redesigning X-Roads in the context of Canada's laws, regulations, and other things. And the beauty with the system, if this continues to go, to proceed down the road that it's going, is we will be able to bake in accessibility, privacy, security, and determine how we actually move data around in the government of Canada based on a core set of principles.
And when you say walking before running, I'm not, running in government is sometimes optimistic maybe, but in terms of the first steps, when I look at Estonia and I look at first steps, it strikes me that the basic information in the population register, which is constant information that is drawn on by other departments, and it's my name, it's my email address, it's my home address, it's my phone number, and I keep telling the government this, and I don't want to do that over and over and over again and waste my time and presumably someone else's time at the department. Is that what we're talking about, walking, where this basic information, or is that not where we're at and we're even earlier on in?
I would say the theory that you've described is accurate. Where we choose to apply it may not be with personal information first. So, for example, the business number is something that we've agreed that there is a central registry for a business number. So we may want to start there. We may want to start with unclassified. Well, no, I promise you, we will also start with unclassified information first, and we could crawl before walking.
Well, I was going to say it sounds like crawling, not walking. Yeah.
Yes.
So okay. With respect to, I mean, you've sort of both laid out paths that you're proceeding on, and it seems like a lot of good work is being done quite quickly. Are there specific recommendations that either of you think we ought to make to government with respect to improving digital government services and respecting Canadians' privacy?
Anybody go? No, okay, we're playing ping pong here. No, I think so. A few things. I do think that we are gradually, and possibly not quickly enough, but we are gradually applying the lessons learned of some of our major failures. You heard me speak to the next gen process. So I think that the culture shift is going to be the big change, and it's not necessarily the culture of the public sector. It's simply the fact that things are changing so quickly. And in some cases, things are happening, and it's not necessarily in our control or something that we didn't see happen because the pace of change in the outside world is very quickly. Whether that is companies automating themselves and us not necessarily having a say in it, and all of a sudden it's a service that we use, that is a major risk. So I think our biggest challenge, or at least if I could say the thing that we have to keep an eye on, is the pace of change, and therefore our laws. And therefore some of our regulations. And so the dialogue is there at a technical level across all levels of government, but the biggest challenge, and where we're seeing actually, I should say, countries that are doing quite well are the ones that are adjusting some of their frameworks more rapidly as the change in technology itself. And so we're learning from that. We have a good opportunity with the Digital 9 to see some of these perhaps smaller countries and how being a little bit more nimble and seeing how we could apply that in Canada. That is probably one of the big lessons learned that we're seeing right now. So whether that is protecting privacy, whether it is regulations for economic growth, we're seeing countries that are able to react faster are actually gaining a lot of benefit from it, both from a citizen protection and also an economic growth perspective.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Next up for 5 minutes, Ms. Shugord.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you to our witnesses for being here today. In an ideal world, what would your vision be of the ideal Canadian digital system if you could do it just the way you liked and just the way you want, based on your expertise? What would it be like? What is your ideal, unrestrained ideal for Canadians? Well, I think what we'd like to present to Canadians is a system that offers digital service to Canadians on the platform of their choice, by the technology of their choice, where there would be zero doors shut. You could go to Service Canada and you could say you could use it. There would be a whole panoply of choices available. And we would be able to co-develop that with our fellow citizens, setting out rules to protect personal information and the identity of Canadians and what is accessible to Canadians. We often forget that we have to give Canadians the choice of door that they want to choose to enter our system. That would be a representation of a service where we wouldn't have to make a demonstration to 43 different federal departments and X number of provincial departments. We want something interoperable at all levels of government. You, sir?
For number one, is in my ideal digital world, excuse me, the system is fully transparent. you understand how the service is being delivered, what the steps are when government asks for your information, when government provides you with the benefit. There is a clear, plain language map of how this all works. The second point I would make is to Mr. Benet's point on the previous question. Systems that are flexible and adaptable are the systems that will keep up with whatever changes. I mean, it was only 12 years ago, 11 and a half years ago, that the first iPhone appeared. 12 years from now, the way we want to interact with digital services and with government could be, it will be something that we are not imagining yet. So knowing that as a systems nerd, I want to know that my government is ready to adapt to whatever comes next.
Si on se compare avec nos voisins américains,
If we compare ourselves to our American neighbors, how are we doing digitally? Are we competitive?
Shares many of the same obstacles that this government and other governments at this scale face. I certainly think that that there are many sides to that question. I'm sure in some places the U.S. government is a little further ahead and some a little further behind. But yeah.
Yeah, also, so happy to jump in. I was in Washington a few weeks ago avec la dirigeante principale de l'information, Suzelle Kemp.
With Suzelle Kempour for the American government, and the same comments as Aaron just made. Did they have a better understanding of certain areas? But if you look at American companies, it could be to their advantage. But maybe we're better off with respect to a protection of data. We are further ahead, though, certainly, in artificial intelligence. And we are able to develop things that we are able to use now. So we're making great strides in AI, but there's a lot of dialogue between the two governments. What is the percentage of Canadians who refuse digital? Is it 100% of Canadians who use digital, or do you have 10 or 15% who refuse to do so? And the digital era can provide more direct services to people, but will it be replaced by robots, by AI? How does it sit with Canadians? Well, our service strategy is to ensure that there is nobody who cannot access a service. We want to have a service counter that if you want to go to, in person, you can go to. That's perfectly okay. But if you want to use digital, we discovered in the Treasury Board Secretariat that Canadians are quite comfortable with increasing the level of service delivered digitally. So how we see a rise in the numbers of persons who are using digital services. I do think it's important that we embrace the concept of leaving no one behind in our service delivery strategy. Also, it's an issue of confidence. You want to be able to show people that they are capable of doing certain things digitally. And this is what we want to offer in our policies. One last question. Have you integrated and informed the new members? We are on the front line. You know, when they have problems with IT or getting into the department digitally, they call us. They call us, first of all, and we're not necessarily equipped to be able to answer their questions. Well, we want members to have confidence in their members' offices, but it is quite a challenge for us. We're on the front line dealing with our constituents. Maybe you can help us help them. This is something that I would bring to the attention of Service Canada, and it's something we're very aware of, that we want to be able to ensure that services reach and target all Canadians.
Thank you. We're way past time. It's
il va donner une chance.
maybe you can answer. fair amount of time. So next up for 5 minutes, Ms. Vandenbelt.
Thank you very much, both of you, all of you. I want to pick up, first of all, on something that you said, Mr. Benet, and it just struck me. You said Canada is leading on ethical AI. Can you explain what you mean by that?
So for the past 14 months, we've been working on direction and policy towards how government departments use automated services moving forward, because it is something that we're seeing increase. You heard me say that PSPC has done a procurement action for creating an AI vendors catalog. We have 74 companies that are now registered in this vendors catalog for the last few weeks. And we've been providing policy direction, working fully in the open, putting our policy instruments or our documents and our directives on GitHub, on Google Docs for the world to see, have collaborated with MIT and Oxford and other universities. So it's been a very open and transparent process in creating a tool set that is called an algorithmic impact assessment. You would be familiar with something called a privacy impact assessment. So when we're looking at privacy, we're looking to develop something similar as a prevention tool for algorithms that will identify to the departments the level of risk. Automating a chat bot that tells you if the skating rink is open through the NCC website is probably a lower risk than automating our borders, for example, or our immigration systems. So we've been developing this tool fully in the open. We've had countries like Mexico start to use the algorithmic impact assessment already. And we have other countries like Portugal and others that we're working together with the Digital 9 to actually use some of these tools that we've been developing, and it creates an international body of knowledge that up until now just did not exist.
Thank you very much. One of the things that I wanted to go into a little bit is the different expectations that different Canadians have. Obviously, there are elderly Canadians who are less comfortable with going online. And then there are others that, as you mentioned, expect that it's going to be just as easy to deal with government as it is to deal with Amazon or any other app that they might be downloading. And when you look at those different expectations, you also have a huge difference in terms of how comfortable people are in giving their information. I mean, I still know people who won't do online banking because they don't trust it. So how do you develop an all-of-government approach when you have completely different expectations by different parts of the public?
I would say in part, and this is actually part of the answer to the previous question as well, those fear or confidence in a system is in part a function of how easy it is to use and understand, and how transparent the system is about how it is dealing with you and with your information. So part and parcel, we understand that digital is, generally speaking, a good, efficient means to provide services at scale at a lower cost. Now, as Mr. Benet noted, we would never want to, close out other forms of service. We want to make sure that we remain multi-channel. But the extent to which adoption in digital happens or does not happen has everything to do with the type of experience that people have, which is why it is so important to be working with those people every step of that process.
If I could add as well, so a few statistics, according to Statistics Canada, so 65 plus age group, about 80% of the homes are internet connected, which is not a great stat, not a bad statistic. So I think the question, and that will relate to what Aaron was saying, is if we can make the service seamless, transparent, easy to use, we'll go a long way in shifting the behavior of the Canadians and the service model that they choose, that they want. We've seen from countries such as Uruguay, who have committed to have 100% of their services 100% digital to 100% of the citizens by the end of this calendar year, that they make an effort on educating the population as well, both from a data privacy perspective, but also from a service delivery perspective and how to engage with government. So those are things that I think we'll have to do to make sure that we don't leave anyone behind.
And going to the people who will be implementing this, to public servants, I mean, both of you have spoken about things like a culture change. I think, Mr. Snow, you said this is more about change management than it is about technology. So I noted that you said there's a public sector digital academy. You've got mechanisms, this talent cloud, to bring talent in for short periods. But how, in terms of the culture shift that this is going to be required by the public service, how are you making sure that is in place, not just the technology, but the people?
So CDS's answer to that question is one partner department at a time. Culture change is not usually something that happens effectively with a single directive that everybody should just start behaving and thinking differently all at once. There are models that are pretty clear about how adoption of new technologies in the public culture occur. It looks like a bell curve. It's called the Rogers curve. Early adopters will try anything, get started. If they're comfortable, their friends in their network start to hear about it, more people take it up. And then at the very end, after mass adoption, there's a few folks like my father who took 15 years to start using email. So it is slow, and what we do is we actually measure, one of the ways we measure the success of a project that we do with the partner department is, as we're wrapping up that project or in the midst of that project, do we see the department starting to use some of the same methods, practices, tools that we brought in possibly for the first time there? Are we seeing them use those methods and practices and tools on other unrelated projects? If we see that, we know that we're succeeding because those notions are starting to take root and spread in the department.
Mr. Renee?
Thank you.
Oh.
Yeah, time's up. So next up for 5 minutes, Mr. Kent.
Thanks, Chair. A question to start off with Mr. O'Brien. We know that federal government departments have been hacked successfully, deeply penetrated any number of times in recent years, in the last decade, by certain foreign players. And I think the cybersecurity of the various repositories in a digital government, like the Estonian model, interconnected but separate repositories of information, that security would be essential to assure Canadians of the security of their privacy. Last month, Neil Parmenter, the president of the Canadian Bankers Association, in a speech talked about the banks, all of the banks' interest in developing digital ID across the country in every sector to enable the banks to better provide the services to their customers. But he also suggested that because of the way that banks today protect access to client security, they should perhaps play an integral role in any future Canadian digital government. What would your thoughts be to that?
So I guess I'll kind of start the answer by saying, I did work for CSE for about 12 years. I was in the cyber defense branch, so these intrusions that you spoke about, I was likely involved in them in some respects. That being said, I no longer work for CSE and don't want to speak on their behalf.
I understand.
But I'll kind of wave my hands on it a little bit. You're right. Like there are actors around the world, both from a nation state level and from a script kiddie or people just trying to break things that are constantly attacking systems around the world. Right? We're not really special, and I think maybe we are special, but I think one of the challenges that a lot of organizations have is that when they get compromised, they don't really want to go and tell people because that creates a negative press for them, right? So essentially what happens is everyone ends up suffering in silence, right? And part of the work I did before I left CSE was to actually take one of the security tools that we had built and open source it to release it to the security community so that we could actually bring up that security bar across the industry. So from a transparency perspective, that's kind of where we sit in terms of security space. To kind of pivot onto your question about the banks, I guess the point to that would be is that I don't actually know how banks secure their systems. So for me to say I think that they are the best in the best position to protect Canadian security would be kind of out of place. I would love if they would be more open and honest about that, just like I would love if Google and Facebook and all these companies would be very open and honest about how they do security things, right? At that point, we could all collectively bring up our security postures, and I think at that point, Canadian citizens would be a lot more trusting of all of the partners in place.
Mr. Benet, have you had any interaction with the Bankers Association? They talk about their multiple levels of protection that they have to protect client personal data, and they seem to think that they would be in the forefront of those who may offer to participate from the private sector in government digital services?
Not directly with the Bankers Association, but I can say that the banks have been engaged in the Pan-Canadian Trust Framework, for example, so this isn't something that is necessarily new to them. We have architecture conversations with the banks fairly regularly. Some of their investments and their sign-in protocols and ours, and making sure that we're working together. We also have, I would suspect increasingly, at least the objective of the new Canadian Centre for Cybersecurity will be to continue interacting cross-sector, because often an attack on a bank could lead to something into CRA, could bleed into other places. So I can tell you that the focus on sort of cross-sector collaboration is something that Public Safety Canada is looking into, and so is CSEC and other colleagues as well, as we're going through this new era of cybercrime, frankly.
Thank you.
You're
That's
good?
okay. That's
Okay.
good for now.
Next up for 3 minutes, Mr. Angus. Or sorry, my apologies. I spoke too soon. It's Madame Fortier for 5 minutes, and then Mr. Angus. My apologies.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. Thank you to our witnesses for being here today. I have several questions that I wanted to ask, but they have already been asked. So here's one that wasn't. You were talking earlier about the protection of personal information legislation that is presently in place and other acts. Clearly, what I understand is that there will be a need to amend them as the government becomes digitized, as services become digitized. Since I've been a member, I've realized that it takes a while to have this type of legislative review occur. So how do you see it when there is a need for change to amend legislation? How do you see and how can you prepare Canadians with respect to that? You've mentioned some good points here. The present legislation, the Privacy Act, has been there since in place since '83, before or at the very outset of the Internet era, and there have been major changes that have occurred since then. There are many sections, some 250 or so, that are covered in this legislation. I and we at TBS are developing an inventory of various situations to present to the Department of Justice, dealing with the architecture to be sure that everybody is aware of needed change. It's not necessarily something that can be produced within a short period of time, within a few years. It will take a while, and it will have to be reviewed quite regularly. To come back to what Aaron said, we have a lot of private sector partners who work with us. So the game changes very often, very frequently, and we work very closely with our innovative partners from the private side. It's an ecosystem that is quite complex, and we have to take the time that is needed to ensure that it is properly done and that Canadians will be involved in this and that privacy will be ensured. Well, in your critical thinking, are there certain measures to your mind that should be looked at right now? How frequently should this be reviewed? We are working on this, and we've given ourselves 2 years to take a look at the sharing of information, a first stab at the sharing of information. We have begun to identify some 11 departments, 187 potential changes that may well be made. But what I can say is that the sharing of information, whether or not it's a problem now, we want to validate it. We have started with X-Roads, as I have said. It's a new concept that we have in mind, and we're going to work with our partners in justice and others to ensure that we have a broad approach to this issue. But we are still thinking about it very deeply. And you, Mr. Snow, do you have something to say to add to this?
My experience in the United States has been that legislation being the slowest and most encumbered of all routes to these solutions can often result in unintended consequences. And we saw that in several cases. And so, I would exhort all of us to look for the smallest and fastest unit of governance, rather, when it's possible to avoid going into the process of actually creating and amending laws.
Merci. Do I still have time?
30 seconds.
Oh, wow. Peut-être si jamais vous
Well, if you have any other models that exist elsewhere in the world that you think that we could use as a basis for our model, I'd be curious. Perhaps you could let us know. I'd be very curious to know what you would be looking towards in the future. Well, you can't dissociate AI from this. There's a great deal of work that's being done currently with respect to privacy, the protection of information, and so on. Thank you.
Mr. Angus for 3 minutes.
Thank you very much. I find the more I stay in politics, the more of a digital atheist I become. I used to be a digital believer in the peaceable kingdom that we are going to create. I represent a rural riding that's bigger than Great Britain. Many of my communities have no roads. And where the Trans-Canada Highway goes through my riding, I have businesses that can't get internet services on the Trans-Canada Highway. In my little communities, the libraries are full of kids after school, not because they're reading books, but because they don't have internet at home. And to follow on my colleague, we are the face of government for them because they get told to go online. But what they're dealing with is a world that is increasingly like Kafka in a world of smartphones, because what government expects from people, your child tax benefits, your EI, your disability claims are becoming increasingly complicated, and having a new interface doesn't change that. In fact, it disenfranchises people because they become more frustrated, so they end up in our offices all the time, and we're having to go through and do the forms. So it's not your responsibility to deal with the inanity of government and the paper and the evidence, but when you talk about making it easier for people, what I see is the question is that it's great that you have all the bells and whistles on the service, but if they can't actually access a way to get through that, then they become even more disenfranchised than if they were just told to mail it.
So I would say on that, rare is it the project that we work on that does not delve into service design and not just digital design. In fact, every product team that we have, in addition to our research and design and our engineers, there's a member of our policy team on the team as well for exactly this reason. Service design spans across, and to communities like yours where there is, where connectivity is at issue and where complexity continues to grow. We design with those users in mind. We go to those people. So, for instance, this isn't necessarily an example about disconnected users, but the work we did for citizenship exam rescheduling for folks who are trying to change citizenship, we knew that some subset of the people who would need to reschedule citizenship exams would be doing so from their phones because it's the only internet access they have, that those connections might be intermittent. And so that particular service is designed to work even when your connection goes in and out. It's designed to work on a phone, on a computer, on a gaming console, any access you have, so that, whatever level of access you have, it's going to be an experience that you're not going to suffer through. Every service is different. Every service has different requirements, different needs based on who's consuming the services. But that's why it's so important and why it's the first of the digital standards to put your users at the center of the design experience, and not just digitally, but for the entire service design.
Thank you, everybody. I think we're going to go and do another. How many people still have questions to the committee? Okay, what we were going to do is do 7 minutes for each party. 7 minutes, and if there's further questions, we'll take them too, so just let me know. So we'll start with the Liberals. I'm not sure, Nathaniel, 7 minutes, and then to Conservatives, and then NDP. 7 minutes. Go ahead.
Yeah, but Charlie Angus one question, you know, that's at least 7. So I just want to, before getting into some additional questions, just to clarify, so just so I'm clear on what I asked previously in terms of what we're going to get back. So the federated trusted digital ID, there's a privacy analysis, and we're going to get or whatever you've got with respect to a privacy analysis, the committee will get. In terms of the answer to my last question and recommendations you would make, Mr. Benet, you had suggested the biggest challenge you face is sort of the need to adjust frameworks rapidly. Mr. Snow, you were nodding your head when Mr. Benet said that. You used the word nimble, and you acknowledged in your opening remarks that the Office of the Privacy Commissioner has mentioned reticence with respect to using privacy as a barrier and comparing the two, and privacy obviously might stand in the way of doing some of the work you want to do, but for good reason. In other cases, maybe bureaucrats are flagging privacy as a concern, but it's not a real concern, or it can actually be met through other means, and it shouldn't actually be a barrier as it goes. Do you have, or has work been done in your office to analyze legislative, you don't want to call them barriers, but things that might, in your view or your office's view, need to be addressed to do more digital innovation?
Yeah, so we've committed to doing a 2-year study within Treasury or TBS on legislative reviews for digital service delivery. We did an assessment of 11 departments, and we found well over, I believe, 150 possible, and I do want to highlight possible legislative impediments. We also found a lot of existing data sharing agreements between the departments, so now we have to sift through those as well. Working with the Privacy Commissioner's Office has started, the work has started, and sharing the plan, so we do have some form of assessment of that.
So let's start there. You've got 11
11 core service departments, let's say frontline.
Okay, great. And you said 150 potential.
Believe the number is 187, but we'll confirm, yeah.
Okay. Has that list been shared with the OPC?
I do not, I will validate that, but I do not believe the list has been shared, but the project intent itself has been shared, yes, because we're not done the work. We're year 1 of 2 right now. So.
Okay. Would you be able to share that list so that I have a better understanding of what we're
absolutely.
talking about? You can share that list with us. I would encourage you also to share with the OPC. Okay, that would be very helpful. Okay, so Mr. Snow, so I park in the City of Toronto. I don't know if you've ever parked in the City of Toronto. I think a lot of people have come before us and have said, a lot of the questions with respect to digital government about building trust, and our Canadians or citizens to trust this. And I think a big part of the answer is not really politicians selling it as far as it goes, but actually building services that work for citizens such that they want to keep using them. And I like parking in the City of Toronto. It's really easy to do. It was, I understand, developed by a San Francisco company. It's an app that then is licensed by the City of Toronto. I even like getting a ticket in the City of Toronto sometimes because it's so easy to dispute the ticket. And I can do so online from the comfort of my own home. So I want, as a citizen, the way I park in the City of Toronto and how I dispute a ticket in the City of Toronto, I want that at all levels of government. And I wonder, I trust in the system as far as it goes with respect to parking in Toronto. CDS, you've listed off a few projects. Is there a project that I could walk up and down the street saying, this is just like parking in Toronto?
Good luck. This is just like... not quite yet. CDS also, being fairly young, is walking before it runs. But I would say, I would say that the citizenship exam reschedule is the closest to that. The process before was that you would get a letter in the mail that looked like a summons. It was scary, and it was written at sort of policy ease. And somewhere near the bottom in small print was some instruction about where to send a letter if you wanted to reschedule. And folks, the team that worked on the project talked to people who were, caught between, okay, do I go take my citizenship exam or attend my daughter's graduation? Or people were trying to make, and so going to the place where now, so first thing that the team did actually, had very little to do with technology, which was to simplify the letter, and the first word at the top of the letter is congratulations. You're one step away from becoming a citizen of Canada. Just that content design change was enough to change the experience for lots of people. And then here's the URL. You go there, you go online, you pick dates that you're available instead, you hit submit, you receive a confirmation soon thereafter. The experience is considerably simpler.
Is there an open call to, so we've got a Minister of Digital Government. That minister presumably says to now her colleagues, if you've got a problem that you want digital services to be improved or service standards to be improved, come to my office and come to CDS and we'll try to tackle this issue for you. Does that happen?
So, I haven't spoken with Mr. Philpott about that particular approach. CDS over the last 18 months has had literally hundreds of conversations with offices in departments and agencies all over government. We listen to a lot of requests, many of which are not necessarily in our wheelhouse, but we try to redirect and help folks in other ways. We have a set of criteria that we use to evaluate the opportunities and figure out where can we have the most impact and do the most reusable work.
So my last question is, in a previous report on the Privacy Act, we recommended a standard of collection and retention of personal information, that it be necessity and proportionality. And it may be a very large question for you to answer in the limited time that I have, but I would appreciate a more fulsome answer in writing if you don't have a full answer now. Is that a problem in your view? If so, why? And if it isn't a problem, then that makes my life a lot easier.
Yeah, go ahead. Sorry, go ahead, Ruth.
Yeah, just to speak to the Privacy Act review, I know the Minister of Justice in her response to this committee acknowledged the government was going to undertake a review of the Act. It is a complex endeavor. So an issue like that is something that's still under consideration. That work's ongoing.
But, less so about government efforts to undertake a review, but if you've got 187 barriers as far as it goes, or whatever word we want to use to describe it, would necessity and proportionality as a standard get in the way of what we want to do? Here's a way of thinking about it, okay? Ann Kavukian was before us and said privacy and security and privacy and services can go hand in hand. They don't have to be at odds with one another. But sometimes actually they are when we talk about data minimization, because sometimes we want to collect more information to provide better services. And if we have less information, we can't provide the same level of services. And so it's a question of necessity for the government service. And that question of necessity might mean data minimization, which might actually mean we don't provide the full suite of services that we may want to provide the best services we can.
So we'll get back to you officially with a writing and an answer in writing. The immediate reaction I would have for you is that we would take that kind of an issue to our architecture review board as we're designing the services as we go through, and then as we see a trend, we then apply a standard. So that has not necessarily gone through the architecture review board at this point at that level of granularity. So, but we'll look to it and get back to you with a written answer.
Thank you, Mr. Erskine-Smith. We're at time. I'll go to Mr. Kent for 7 minutes. Do you want to? Oh, with Mr. Gord, go ahead.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chairman. I want to ask Mr. Snow to answer my question that I asked earlier about the 15 or 20% of citizens that don't really use digital. How can you encourage them to do so? How can you get in touch with them and make them try?
And more obviously secure those services are, I believe, the more folks will use them. This is also, in some ways, because of how long it takes to do this kind of work, a question of, if I may borrow a Canadian expression, skating to where the puck is going and not to where it is. And availability of connectivity and so on is only getting better, not getting worse. I mean, again, there's services will always be multi-channel for as long as there are people who can only access service. Even countries with incredibly high rates of digital adoption for their government interactions, Denmark, 90+%, they still continue to provide services through alternate channels when people cannot or will not participate. But you can incentivize the use of digital services and thereby move more people into that experience if they find it acceptable. But it's got to be usable.
Vous avez touché une facette aussi intéressante.
You touched on something very interesting with respect to the safety of digital services. There are increasing numbers of attacks, sometimes false attacks. I get all kinds of things like that on my phone. And I've been banking 45 years at the same bank, and all of a sudden on my phone I get some sort of message purportedly from the bank. It's important for Canadians to feel that they are protected, that the digital system is protected. Is it easier, perhaps, to have Canadians be at risk because of the increased use of digital today? Well, we look at it from all facets, architecture and so on. We want it to be secure, and it creates a very stringent conversation. It's been in place for some 12 months now. My colleagues could answer if there are certain specific questions that they could speak to, but I would say educating the population is very important. If you look at countries like Uruguay, where they literally brought iPads to people in their homes and said to them, this is how henceforth you are going to deal with the government and communicate with the government. And you educate them about possible intrusions, hacking, and so on. And all of this should be part of the curriculum, teaching people, municipally even, at the municipal level.
That handles personally identifiable information or other sensitive information to provide the basic tools for a confidence-inspiring level of security, a common best practice. For instance, today is to use what is called two-factor authentication. So you enter not only a password, but not having entered a password, you need to be able to either get a code on your phone or carry around a physical key. I don't have mine on me. It's in my bag. Which provides a built-in suspenders solution. The systems that provide that, are providing an order of magnitude more security and confidence in the systems, and they are much more difficult to scam.
Les nouveaux systèmes numériques.
These new digital systems, will they allow departments to have more interconnection amongst themselves to do research about Canadians without Canadians knowing about it, without having any type of commentary from Canadians, say, for example, about their income or where the money Canadians have comes from, say, through the banks? Is that done? Presently, our laws do not allow us to do that in the way that we are organized. It's organized vertically within an institution.
The information is collected and used for the purpose by which it was collected. Donc, on aurait beaucoup de la misère, je dirais même du point de vue légal, de faire.
So, from the legal perspective, it would be very hard for us to do what you described. When we talk about integrated digital, we look at it from a rather utopic point of view. At the present time, we're organized vertically, not horizontally, and it prevents the sharing of data and intrusion. Thank you. No, it's okay. Okay.
It's Mr. Angus.
Thank you. I'm interested in the question of AI. I see it gets promoted a lot in smart governance. We can use the AI and help fight climate change. I'm not making that up. I saw that, and we can use AI and it'll help mitigate natural disasters. And I mean, no offense to my colleagues in the government side, governments love things that all the bells and whistles are magic and seem to offer miracle cures. But I'm interested in the disenfranchisement of citizens through the use of AI. The way that some are end up being classified as winners and losers in the digital realm, in the social realm, that the ideas that are used in the modeling of AI will have social impacts. So my question is how do we, in our work in committee, actually ensure that when we're talking about AI, that there's an ethical lens, that's a transparent lens, and a lens that makes sure that people are not being targeted or disenfranchised because they don't fit the algorithm.
So that's one of the burning questions we have in the digital service space writ large, not just in Canada, but frankly around the world. It is a question of values. Different countries will automate different things according to their values framework, and we want to make sure that Canada automates some of its services based on our values framework. So it is a continuous conversation. Currently, the directives that we're putting in place are looking at certain elements. So, for example, making sure that we don't have a black box making a decision on behalf of a human. Necessarily, so that we know the decision patterns of the algorithms as they change is an important factor, because how do we authenticate the fact that the government of Canada is responsible for this service if it's an algorithm? We also have directives in there where, according to the level of severity, you may have to have an internal peer review of the automation that you're working on, is something that we're considering as well, putting in some of these directives, and which is all part of our algorithmic impact assessment tool that we talked about previously, that we've developed collaboratively around the world. So those are some of the examples. I would also point to data. We could have the most unbiased code ever and have bad data and biased data, and we've seen examples in the private sector from recruitment tools at Amazon and other things where the data was biased, therefore the service became biased and the algorithm became biased. So it's not just a question of the technology, it's actually a question of the data holdings that we currently have as well. So those are all things that we're looking at. It's not a perfect solution, but it's something that's going to have to iterate quite frequently.
Well, I'm very interested in the black box issue because, corporations, vendors wanting to deliver services are going to say that's proprietary technology. Is the black box going to be open to review by bureaucrats, or is it going to be open source so public can see the calculations that are going in to deciding how the algorithms work?
Yeah, currently that discussion is happening literally as we speak, so I can't answer that definitively one side or another. It is something we want to take into consideration. Because there's pros and cons to both sides of this thing. We want to make sure we have the best technology available, but at the same time, we have to respect certain values and ethics that are important to the country. So we do have instances where we have a private sector code that's being held in case there's an emergency. So those are the things we're looking at as well. To be very transparent, this is a new space. Yep. Governing algorithms is a new space. Canada's in one of the countries that's actually taking the lead on some of these things. So the key for us will be to work iteratively with our partners globally that share the same values.
Well, I think something happened today in the House of Commons that I think shocked all of us was an accusation that there was racial profiling of young black activists who came into Parliament Hill. And I have been 15 years in Parliament, and I'm a white guy with white hair. And I think Parliament's very open, it's very inclusive, the police are excellent, but we had a case that people were being profiled because of their color. So my question is to ensure that when we're looking at profiling and the black box technology, that the bureaucracy may not be the ones who can best see that. It will be challenged by people who are the ones who are being victimized by the profiling that is done. So that's my question, is how do we ensure that there is that kind of public input and public challenge to make sure that the algorithms do reflect the values of our society in a way that is moving everyone forward?
So we have a few existing mechanisms. For example, the Architecture Review Board, which I've mentioned a few times, will be looking at automation projects as they are being identified in investment plans and departments and other things. So from concept, we will be looking at applying our values throughout, from procuring to deploying. So the Architecture Review Board will look at that. I think the level of transparency will be very important from our services as we move forward. And some of our directives, we're looking at the fact that we must disclose that you are talking to a robot and not a person on the other side of this chat, for example, will be good. And that we are expecting, frankly, citizens to report issues back, and the dialogue will become increased and very active as we start automating. It is a pace of change discussion as much as it is a values discussion as well.
Well, thank you for that. I mean, again, as a musician, I know what a polyrhythm is. I don't really know what an algorithm is, but I think it's really important. I just want to know that other people have an opportunity to have their input in.
I would also just note that we're used to talking about computer code as something that we understand in terms of how the code actually functions. We don't generally treat each other that way, and increasingly as the code gets more complex and harder for us to comprehend ourselves, it may become more important to be focusing, in addition to focusing on how the code operates, but also to focus on what are the outcomes that are actually occurring, and if the outcomes are going in the wrong direction, then hold the systems responsible for the outputs and not just for the nature of the decision making itself.
Okay, thank you very much.
I guess Mr. Saini for one question. I thought you said one.
Two small ones.
Go ahead.
I just want to talk about technology, but since Mr. Angus raised the point about AI, if we look at the advancement of AI right now, there's some speculation that in 15 to 20 years, 40% of the current job market will be displaceable. So you can see how fast the private sector is moving. In terms of the government sector, how will you make sure, because there are going to be points when you have a digital government architecture where you will also need a touch point for the private sector. How will you make sure that the technology will remain so that both systems are somewhat equal?
That's a very good question. I would answer with a few things. First, I think artificial intelligence and automation, like any new technology, my colleague Mr. Snow spoke to a hype cycle. It's actually a thing in our sector where we kind of see where that technology sits on the hype cycle. And I still think that artificial intelligence and the concept of job replacement is something that is frankly very debated. It's gone from the machines will take our jobs to you're increasingly seeing coexistence of humans and machines and how that'll actually augment the work as opposed to replace the work. So I can't speak definitively on the strategy because I still think it's very early in the hype cycle. I do think what's important, and when we're seeing countries do this well, are the countries that make the investments in these technologies, but also bring a multidisciplinary lens to this discussion. So it's not only an economic growth issue, it's a service to Canadians issue writ large, and it's also how the private sector serves citizens as well. So I think it'll be important for us to keep an eye on the developments. Often things are done a service provider from a company without it's happened so quickly we don't see it. So for example, translation services increasingly are becoming very efficient on social media platforms, and that's only for the last 8 months that you've actually seen an efficiency curve really spike. So all of a sudden that's a different conversation than we were having 6 months ago. So I think the key will be multidisciplinary, making sure that we don't bring departments to an issue, but we bring a horizontal sort of lens to the issues and just continue that narrative and the dialogue.
So final question. As I'm sure you're well aware, in 2007, Estonia faced a cyber attack. And one of the responses to that cyber attack was to have scalable blockchain technology, which they found to be secure and have a strong amount of integrity for the system. Is there any thoughts about employing that here?
So where I would say that we are very increasingly mature on the artificial intelligence path, we're a little bit less mature in blockchain in the Government of Canada. It doesn't mean that we don't have places that are experimenting. So we are looking at digital identification pilots with provinces, for example, using blockchain. We're looking at grants and contributions, I believe, at the National Research Council using blockchain. It is probably the next area that we need to look at. So I would like to say we're more mature in that space, but that we're actually not. We invested heavily in the AI space to match the investment that the government's made in AI across the country to make sure we were ready to ingest those services. I would suspect blockchain and a few other concepts will probably be next on our radar.
Okay, thank you.
I just have one last question. Mr. Binet, you talked about using Google Docs as part of the interaction, I guess, with our citizens, and its ease of interaction too is key to it all. But I think one of the things our committee's been concerned about is this data collection and the huge data companies that they are, whether they're Amazon, Google, Facebook, et cetera. And we see this marriage happening. It might be where we eventually go to vote on Facebook. Maybe there's an app that we use, and maybe that's a subjective thing to think about, but a concern to a lot of us in this room. Being that you're part of our bureaucracy that's making this system for government, what recommendations would you say regulatory-wise would you make on some of these big data platforms? Because you've established the fence around our data as Canadian citizens, and maybe this is more for Mr. O'Brien. What regulations would you, in your personal opinion, apply to these big data companies?
I think in terms of regulation, I would completely pass that over to Alex, but I'll go back to my earlier point that
let me ask it as a citizen, though. You're ones that use these You use Google, I'm
I
sure,
think
and all the rest.
transparency is kind of the key
Yeah.
in that, right? And I'm not going to speak ill of any companies, but there are some companies that are very good about being transparent about how they do security of, say, their cloud services, right? So Google, Microsoft, Amazon, they all publish very good security white papers about what they do to protect information that are in their systems, right? They tend to also try to be as transparent as they can on the data that they're collecting, right? In a lot of cases, I think sometimes people just don't understand the things that they're agreeing to. And I think that's some of the things that have been done in the UK and in the EU with GDPR in terms of getting more informed consent. So I think that's I would leave it at that, but I think Alex probably has something to say.
Yeah. So maybe a three-part answer briefly. I think we need to get better at understanding that there's certain pieces of data that it's okay to be on some of these platforms on, and there's other pieces of data that it's not. Personal information, I would say, is too unclear at this point. But it doesn't mean that we can't look at the discussions with these vendors and with these suppliers around here's the values that we want to bring in how we manage personal information. Here are the requirements around the security. But some of the work that we do on policy, for example, should be completely transparent and open when we're talking about algorithmic impact assessments, because these are things that will impact a citizen directly. So putting that on Google Docs and frankly 10 other platforms is not necessarily an issue. That's the first part. The other part that I would like to just bring standards into the conversation versus regulation. I think there's an opportunity to start with better standard setting across the country. My time in the private sector and when I was at OpenText, I would often run into other countries that had set standards for themselves that frankly possibly had put to an advantageous positions their own organizations or their own enterprises. I think that we need to look at standards as both an offensive and a defensive mechanism and find ways to actually start looking at these standards as a first step. Because regulations, the problem is, could stifle innovation. That you'll hear that a lot from the private sector and some of my former colleagues, but possibly a step. But there is probably some other steps you could look at before diving directly into regulations, because it is something that is a double-edged sword.
Okay. Mr. Snow?
Yeah. So obviously, the policies and whether those vendors are encrypting at rest, whether they're encrypting in transit, whether they're taking various steps to protect data is part of the equation. The other part of the equation is how are we protecting our own account management. So making sure that we are using, password managers, making sure that we are using that second factor authentication that is available on many of these systems at this point and increasingly will probably start to become required. These are steps that government can also encourage and help explain. So there's a role there as well.
Thank you. Ms. Naylor, do you have any response as well?
Not on that issue.
Okay. Okay. I think is there any further questions? Go ahead, Mr. Angus.
Well, just before we rise, I just wanted to bring to the committee's attention, I think we should have a discussion. The minister's announcement that she's going to have the Committee of Procedure and House Affairs look at the potential threat of Facebook on the electoral system, to me, is like we've done this work. I find it surprising that all the work that we've done that's been recognized internationally, a few months out from the election, our committee's been completely sidelined. Our report's been sidelined. We've heard nothing back. I think that we should raise a concern with the minister. If she wants to know about the threat posed by Facebook and undermining the platform, we've done all this work. We've done it.
Any response?
So I had understood that Minister Gould was on our list to fulfill. Yeah. So I mean,
that motion, yeah.
Right. So I mean, I would say fair game to ask her all sorts of questions, including on this, and it would make no sense for PROC to undertake a study that we've already pursued and completed. So
We can definitely. I can write them a letter to explain what we've actually done and send a report along with it. If that would.
Yeah,
help.
that's what I would suggest, Chair, that you send it to
have the
her and to the
minister-
committee as well to say that this work has been done. We spent a year on it, and we did travel internationally. I mean,
Would you like to make a motion to have the minister appear, or is that?
well, I would like to make a motion that you would write a letter. I would like the minister to appear. Certainly, I think she should appear, but I think we should also write a formal letter to the chair of PROC and to the minister offering that we've done this work. It seems absolutely crazy to start from scratch.
Yeah.
Actually, no. I did not see the appearance, but my expectation was that she got asked questions and this was sort of an off-the-cuff remark. I have no idea, though. Obviously, she's aware that we conducted this study, and we should. I wouldn't spend your time writing letters. I mean, when is she scheduled to appear?
I'm not sure. Our current clerk is under the weather today, so we'll find out
I
when
see.
he
Okay,
comes
yeah.
back.
But I mean, this is a fair. I think this is a fair conversation to have, and to impress upon her the work that we've done, and to ask why she thinks PROC is the appropriate place instead of our committee, and if she has additional questions that she thinks the committee should pursue, perhaps it's the committee that is already well briefed and versed in this should be pursuing it. So, but we've already got her, so I wouldn't waste. I mean, unless you want to write letters and spend your time doing so, feel free. But I think she's coming.
Well, my
Mr.
only
Angus.
concern is that if this committee's been given instructions to start, you know, our conversation with her is irrelevant. I think they should be made aware as well that we've done this work. We'd be more than willing to advise them, and I mean, otherwise we'll be, by the time they finish with their witness list, then the next election will be over, and meanwhile our report's sitting on a shelf. And,
By all means, send the chair of PROC a copy.
and
of
I've
her
been in
report.
Parliament too many years to see parliamentary reports. People love them the day they come out, and the only people remember them the day after the committee that did it, and nobody pays attention. So I'm going to fight for this one.
Yeah, and so I'll write the letter and send it over. Just one last thing for committee, just with the International Grant Committee, it's been proceeding. We're going to do a press release, I believe, tomorrow. I thought it was clear already, but I've been getting asked by our current clerk as well about doing releases, about giving the permission as chair to do the releases. Is that still the case? That's what I thought we had already approved. We're good to go. Okay, Mr. Angus?
Yeah, to that, the report, the UK report, I find is devastating in its statements. I think that we really have to be focused on Facebook when we talk. I mean, if they were referring to Facebook as international digital gangsters, our committee needs to be. Like, why didn't we come up with that? Man,
I was like, this is Charlie all over it.
I know, the goddamn Brits.
Yeah.
So I think that we have to be talking about what does the international community do in response to I mean, I think the UK committee should give us their report, and we should be talking about it internationally. What are the steps that we need to take?
Yeah, I challenge you. They released it on Monday, I believe, and I challenge all of us to read it here. There was a acknowledgement of our presence there too in the International Grant Committee as well. So that's it was a nice tip of the hat to us. So anyway, thank you. Thank you again to the presenters for coming. A lot of information, a lot of stuff to deal with. Have a great day.